Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pastor Jardula. I am here today with our good friend Cornel West. I got to say, Dr. West, I don't know if you remember the first time we met. It was in 2020 at the DNC California convention. It was a room full of people in a caucus speaking about war and imperialism, and there was a lot of veterans there. And you walked through this whole crowded room, and you walked right up to me, and then we hugged and we embraced. And I told you, Dr. West, it's so great to meet you. I love what you stand for. I love what you've done. And it was you, in fact, who gave me the courage to go and speak to people differently than me, with people with different ideologies. You were the first to really break through for me with that because things were so tribal back then as they are right now, Dr. West. So I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. Because, like I said, there's been a few people since then who've also pushed that. Let's go talk to people thinking differently than us. But I think you were the first, Dr. West, and I think that's great that you stand for that.
Wow, you're so very kind, though, brother. Well, I want to begin by saluting both you, your leadership, your persons who work with you, be they your interlocutors, as well as those behind the scene. I met that wonderful brother with that lovely shirt on. What's his name?
Cheese Slice is what we call him out here.
Yeah, that's him. That's him. That's him. We salute him as well. No, you all been such a force for good. And that California moment, that must have been, what was that, San Francisco, maybe?
I think it was Long Beach. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, it was Long Beach.
I think it was Long Beach.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. All right.
It could have been San Francisco. I get them confused because I went to a few Democratic conventions back in the days, and I think it was Long Beach. I'm pretty sure it was Long Beach.
I'm sure your memory's better than mine, though, but it's just a blessing to be here. And I'm really here to learn and listen, though, man. You know, no doubt about it. You've been out there for a good while on the ground, and you've been taking in, critically reflecting on some of the crucial issues of predatory capitalist tendencies and imperial foreign policies and wrestling with forms of xenophobia. I just revel in your humanity, my brother.
Dr. West, you're too kind, and thank you so much. And I really wish Fiorella was here with us today. We had talked about before the show, she was out there speaking on behalf of Alex Saab in Venezuela. It's such an important issue right now because when we start jailing these humanitarians, right, these people who get food into hungry people's mouths, who get shelter to homeless people, Alex Saab is definitely a hero, and it's a shame what they've done to him, what they've done to people like Julian Assange and others. It really is a shame. So I wish she was here today.
No, I salute her.
So let's just jump right into it, Dr. West.
Yes, indeed.
There's a few things that I want to talk about, and there's a few things that are a little confusing to me. I've since starting the show have kind of gone on an interesting journey as a leftist. I still consider myself to be a leftist, an anti-imperialist leftist, an old school liberal, as you will, one who believes in freedom of speech, freedom of a press, believes in bringing home, closing down these bases and bringing these people home, our troops home, and stop spreading death and destruction around the world. But I've also had this quest of going on and seeing elections in Nicaragua, seeing elections in Honduras, in Brazil, in Colombia, being an election integrity activist. And that has allowed me to get in the room with Trumpers a lot. You know, just recently I was at a Kerry Lake event, and Kerry Lake is very pro Donald Trump. My question to you right off the bat, Dr. West, because this is a little bit confusing to me. You have said right out the jump that you are planning to go into Trump land and to speak to Trumpers and try to connect with them. How can you connect with them if you continuously call Trump a neo-fascist? I mean, how are we going to extend an olive branch where we're just pretty much shunning people away? I mean, I would also like to talk about that word neo-fascist when we're done, because I think it's a BS word. It is absent from the original meaning of fascism, which is actually corporatism, the merger of state and corporations, where we keep our eye on the prize. Neo-fascist is more of a term where we look at our citizens. It seems like it's been weaponized. But first things first, how do we connect with Trumpers, Dr. West, if we're going to just shun them right off the bat?
Oh, but I'm not shunning them at all, though, brother. The first thing you do when you approach another person is you don't see a stereotype, you see a human being. And you zero in on their wounds and their scars, but also their perceptions of the world. But you have to be honest. I have to be honest in terms of how I understand the world. You see, so when I come in and I've already honestly said, well, I think the Pied Piper that you're following at the moment is a gangster. And I define what gangster activity is: saying and doing things with no accountability, no answerability, taking no responsibility. And then I say, as a neo-fascist, neo-fascism is scapegoating the most vulnerable. So you can attack the immigrants, you can attack black folk, you can attack gays and lesbians, rather than confronting the most powerful. And the most powerful is Wall Street and military, not in rhetoric, but in your policies. In your policies. So I would tell him, look at Brother Trump and myself in terms of militarism. Now, he says that he's a populist. He says that he wants to pull back on big military, but every budget was a expansion of the military budget. Every move was an attempt to justify, put it this way, that he so often would want to justify that expansionism, just like the Democrats. I mean, Democrats are tied to big military too. So I'd have to be honest. So in that sense, it's not an attempt to smear and to trash. It's being very honest and candid. And they can come right back at me and use certain categories and certain names. And I would say, I'm glad you're honest about what you think about me. Now, let me tell you why you're wrong. If you think Brother Trump is not a gangster, tell me what your definition of gangster. If you think he's not a neo-fascist, tell me what your definition of neo-fascism is. Now, that's part of what we'll do today in terms of your definition of neo-fascism, more corporatist and so forth and so on. But mine is using the flag, using narrow forms of patriotism to mobilize citizens, usually feeling as if they're wounded and under attack, and then scapegoating the most vulnerable. That's what we saw in fascism of the past. It could be Jews in Germany and so forth. So that in that sense, you can't have a genuine Socratic dialogue or conversation if you're not honest and candid about what your perception is at the moment. Now, I might be wrong. I'm there to learn and listen from the Trump brothers and sisters, right? I might be wrong. But when I see xenophobia, when I see racism, when I see transphobia, when I see homophobia, I call it out. They say, well, Brother West, it's not that. Then convince me. But most importantly, I'm showing them I care about their suffering, and I want to make sure all of them as human beings and fellow citizens gain access to Medicare quality, education quality, jobs with a living wage, safe community, the same thing that any other fellow citizen deserves or any other human being deserves. So that's the beginning of that dialogue, my brother.
Okay, but see, listen, I used to use this term. I do a lot of work in Latin America, right? I wanted to send you this video I have of Cuba, of me trying to build a bridge where I go to Cuba and I bring a lot of baseball equipment and bats and balls. And I'm just trying to humanize people, to get that whole anti-communist sentiment out of their mind. Right. Now, the first thing I did, Dr. West, is I removed the term that is often used. It was used by Castro. It's gusano. It's calling people a worm, right? But if I want to convince and I want to have conversations with Marco Rubio, if I see him, or Paulina Aguilar, or Bob Menendez, if I use that word gusano, it immediately shuts things down. And I feel that's what neo-fascism does. But I think the real part where people have a problem with is that you call Brother Biden a neoliberal disaster, when if you just put it on paper right now, and I'll tell you this right now, I think that sometimes people look at this and they're like, well, Dr. West is calling him a neoliberal disaster and calls Trump a neo-fascist, when the corporate entities are way more invested in President Biden than they are Donald Trump, that he's kind of carrying a little water for Biden, and he's making that excuse that it was okay to vote for Biden over Donald Trump, which I think, was completely wrong. If you told me today, and I'm never going to vote for Biden, I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump, but if you put a gun to my head, Dr. West, and said I had to vote for either one of the two, I'm voting for Donald Trump. We're on the brink of World War III here now. Can you see the hypocrisy there? And can you maybe square that circle right there and kind of give us a little insight to this whole, like, Biden gets this treatment, but Trump gets that treatment?
Yeah, I mean, one is that we could have been on the brink of World War III with Trump too. Anybody who's head of a militaristic and aggressive empire can lead the world toward war. It could have been with North Korea. I mean, there's all kinds of different possibilities in that regard. So that if we use solely the possibility of nuclear holocaust, nuclear exchange, the head of any empire, when it comes to the most powerful empire in the history of the world, the United States, it could be Trump or Biden in that regard. No, I think part of the difference here is the difference between a catastrophe and a disaster is that I think you would have to acknowledge that when it comes to gestures toward rights and liberties, gestures toward trade union activities, gestures toward trying to deal with voting rights and trying to deal with gerrymandered voting patterns, you see, that the disastrous Democratic Party, rhetorically, symbolically, but at times even concretely, are able to move in the direction toward those Black voters and toward those trade unionists and so forth than was Trump. What I mean by, see, the problem is that both of these parties have such a vicious dimension of them that they do look so similar. It looks similar. Take to the brothers right now in Jenkins and Park in Mississippi. Parties look similar. Look similar on the West Bank, in the Middle East. Parties look similar. If you're arguing that Trump is better than Biden across the board, given his attempts to reshape government, viciously attack immigrants, viciously attack Black folk, viciously attack progressives like yourself and myself as leftists, always Marxists and communists and so forth, then that's a different kind of argument. I mean, I think the important thing is to build an alternative to both.
Gotcha.
We've got to begin to create lenses that are highly available to people so they can see the ways in which both parties are parasitic on each other, and that the neoliberalism feeds the neo-fascism and vice versa. Now, if we don't want to use neo-fascism, I don't know what term you would use. Authoritarian populism, is that a term that you would go with?
Maybe. I mean, the term neo-fascism seems to be twisted so it doesn't, carry the intent of the original word fascism. It seems more divisive, where it's pitting people against each other. Because I got news for you, Dr. West. Believe you me, conservatives were concerned about immigrants coming across the board way before Donald Trump, and that's not a new thing with him.
That's
Maybe
true.
He gave them a little strength to talk about this, but I think a lot of the problems or the issues we disagree on with our conservative brothers and sisters have always been there. You know what I'm saying? Trump just made it a little bit more open to say these things, which I like, because then we can get to the problems, because we can identify, the issue a lot clearer. But
I just don't like the hatred, though, brother. I don't like the venom and the vitriol. I mean, the thing about it, for me to call Trump a neo-fascist and for him to call new immigrants rapists and criminals, I mean, how could one be supportive of a Trump using that language? And yet, when I call somebody a neo-fascist, I have a definition of it. Yeah. Isn't it the case that he still in policy supported cutting taxes for the rich, facilitating Wall Street expansion, military increase, waving the flag, reinforcing the militarism abroad? See, that would be where I would want to
I got you.
Impart zero in on, just as a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I got you. But policy-wise, we can start lining these things up. Biden is guilty of all these things. Biden wrote the crime bill, and we know how devastating that was. Donald Trump, First Step Act, right? A little bit different. You know what I'm saying? We can go back and forth on the situation. I think the solution is what you said, is building something outside these two
Absolutely.
establishment candidates and whatnot. But let's get into
But the
what.
important thing is, though,
Yeah.
having exactly the conversation we're having now
Yeah.
across political and ideological lines, and very much across racial lines, because you cannot deny that white supremacy has played a very important role in Trump's social base. Now, all of them are not racist. No, not at all. In fact, 1 out of 10 voted for my dear brother Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the weaponizing and the mobilizing of racist tropes and racist narratives has been a very important role
Yeah.
in
But we
Donald
have a
Trump's
guy.
project.
We got a guy who said on the floor of Congress that I don't want my kids growing up in a racial jungle. You know what I'm saying? We got the Patriot Act. We got Iraq. We got policies that I think personally it would take Donald Trump 3 more terms to catch up to what Joe Biden has done since back in the days. And that's just, and once again, I'm not going to vote for either one of them. I think we should stay away from
neither
them.
one of us are
Yep.
talking about voting for neither one.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear about and honest. I love your talk about truth shall set us free. None of us have a monopoly on truth. Truth is jagged edge. It cuts a lot of different ways, and that's why a certain kind of humility that we both trying to exemplify is important so we can learn. But you're absolutely right. But what we're saying is the white supremacy cuts through both of them so deeply and thickly.
Yeah. And bottom line, at the end of the day, Donald Trump mentioned that we should disband NATO, and Joe Biden has strengthened it. And if we have World War III, then nothing else matters. That should be the number one issue on the table right now, is avoiding nuclear holocaust. And Joe Biden, I thought, has brought us a lot closer to that, especially with the people he's picked, the Blinkens, the Sullivans, the Victoria Nuland. But
yes. Well, no, the Nuland was in the Trump administration too, right there, connected to Ukraine. I mean, part of the continuity of the two parties is precisely manifest in how
he got rid of her, though. He did fire her.
Parties doing different administration.
Yeah, he did fire. Well, let's get into, because I want to talk a little bit about the same language we kind of use towards the neo-fascists, the problem I think you could have, and I'm glad you explained that. But I'm a little bit bothered by that same language towards Vladimir Putin. Putin's a thug. Putin's a gangster. I mean, if you're going to be the president of the United States, how are you going to sit down with a man across from you who you're supposed to getting rid of nuclear weapons and try to convince him of that? How are you going to talk peace when you're saying, and I want the plain and simple, this question: did Vladimir Putin have a choice to do what he did in Ukraine? Because I don't think people are kind of really talking about the crux of what's going on. I don't know if people understand. Do you think that Vladimir Putin had a choice to not go into Ukraine?
Well, I appreciate the question, though, brother, because I mean, you got a number of different levels here. First thing to keep in mind is that you've got American imperial provocation with the promise that NATO would not move 1 inch toward Russia. The American empire reneged on that promise. A number of decades later now, 13, 14 countries are now part of NATO, which were formerly associated with the Soviet Union. So it's very clear that that is a massive provocation. I've said on many, many, many occasions that if there were missiles in Mexico or Canada, the United States government would blow them to smithereens. Why? Because empires behave that way, and America is an empire. Now, there's no equivalency between the Russian Empire and the American Empire in terms of power. There's no doubt about that. There's no equivalency at all. But at the same time, there's also the fact of coming out of the KGB and a whole host of other trajectories of Putin himself, maybe calling him a gangster or calling him I've never used the word thug, calling him a gangster might be viewed as just some kind of symbolic gesture to the liberal and neoliberal circle. But I'm concerned about Russian brothers and sisters, just like I'm concerned about Ukrainian brothers and sisters, just like I'm concerned about anybody else. And when you have mechanisms of repression anywhere, I'm going to call that into question. So that you have provocation. We're not moving an inch. 14 countries now with U.S. missiles right on the borders of the Russian Empire. Putin's back is against the wall. Now, I viewed invasion and occupation of any country, the violation not just of national sovereignty, I view it as a crime against humanity. So that the question becomes, you got a larger U.S. American imperial backdrop, pushes the Russian Empire against the wall. He responds with this invasion and occupation. And what do I call for? Ceasefire, stop the war, sitting down with Putin, sitting down with the Chinese, sitting down with the Turks, sitting down with the Ukrainians to generate a diplomatic strategy or diplomatic process to stop the suffering. I am concerned about the suffering of Ukrainian brothers and sisters. I'm in solidarity with the Russians who are actually going against the war, because that takes courage. But that doesn't mean that we downplay the role of the American imperial project. NATO historically has been an instrument of American imperial power, of American global power. That doesn't mean that Putin doesn't take some responsibility. He takes responsibility given his response to provocation and the ways in which that's generated this human suffering, in this case, Ukrainian brothers and sisters suffering. So again, it's a matter of trying to be honest and truthful about the historical backdrop, the present moment, and how do we bring the war to an end, because it's on the road to nuclear exchange, on the road to nuclear holocaust.
Okay, but I want to know what the alternatives were here, because I'm not saying this because I just like Vladimir Putin. I want to be accountable for what our country's done. And you talked about the NATO encroachment. But what about the 2014 coup, when we removed the government that was there and put in a puppet government, where Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt were on the Maidan handing out cookies?
That's right.
We also got MiGs 1 and 2, but we also have the OSCE talking about the bombing that was intensified in the Donbass. Now we have 14,000 civilians, mainly civilians, killed in the Donbass since we put in the puppet government and we armed these Nazis. When he started upping the bombing again, and it was very apparent that they were going to go in, Putin, once again, being very passive, moved his troops to the border. He then met with Biden in Geneva, and he talked about whatever. Nothing came about it, but it seemed like, you know, they were whipping the European countries to say, hey, listen, if Putin goes in, agree to go with sanctions with us on them, and then all of a sudden they up the bombing again. And we have heard from testimony. Fiorella is not here today. She's been to the Donbass before. We've talked to people who went to the Donbass. Colonel McGregor said that he had talked to some people, said, thank God you guys, the Russians, came in, because they were about to slaughter us. It would have been genocide. So what alternatives did Putin have to not go in? Let's not forget, Dr. West, it was 8 years. Mainly the Russian population was saying, why are you dragging your feet? Even Yanukovych, when he was fleeing in 2014, said, Vladimir, you're going to have to get involved, because they're going to go right there. These people hate the Russians, and they're going to slaughter them. What alternatives did Putin have? And if we don't accept the fact that we didn't just provoke him, we held a gun to his head. We pushed him into this thing. If we don't take accountability for that, what does that say about us as a country?
Well, I mean, what it says about us is that we're hypocrites. What it says about us is that we'll rationalize our innocence even when we contribute to the devastation and to the catastrophe. There's no doubt about that. But I do want to resist the notion of somehow saying that that Putin has no responsibility for the criminal invasion. I think that one of the reasons why we want to learn from each other, I mean, you're saying he pursued every nonviolent alternative possible before he was pushed into this criminal invasion and occupation. Now, if I could be convinced of that, then in fact, I would have to rethink it. I would have to reevaluate where I am. But I'm convinced that the major responsibility is the American imperial provocation. By provocation, I'm using that in the broadest sense. That includes 2014. That includes the coup. That includes a variety of different steps that pushes Russian elites against the wall. But I'm still, I still think that this sense of trying to absolve Putin of any responsibility, I'm not convinced of that. I still think that there's a sense in which the American imperial project sits at the center, but Russia is also an empire. It has its own sub-imperial sensibilities, sub-imperial strategies, and so forth. And I think that is not something to completely erase or eliminate. Now, am I being fair to your position?
Are you asking me? I think you're wrong, because I don't look at them as an empire. I look at them as more of a superpower. I look at China. I don't look at them as an empire. I look at more of them as a superpower.
We disagree. Wait, but what's the difference in your view between a superpower?
Well, the empire is ever expanding. Imperialism, where we have bases all over the place. You know, we have 800 bases across
we're
the
not
globe.
talking American empire. Yeah. We know that's the case.
China has what?
I'm talking about the history of China, the history of Russia. Is there a history of an expansion and the subjugation of peoples?
There is a history of
absolutely in both cases. That's
present day, though. Present day, there's action and there's reaction, and China and Russia are simply reacting to the actions of the empire. You know as well as I do, Dr. West. We go into a country, we go in there with a missile, a gun, and our monetary system, and we force these countries. Because I'm going to talk about Latin America, Rex, right now. China goes in with their bank account. Build a road, build a dam. You know, Russia, Putin, the Russian Federation just squashed, I believe, in an African country, their debt. He just squashed it completely. So, I mean, I think there's a big difference between saying that we're on the same level. That's what I always have.
I'm with, and my dear brother Baraka has corrected me on this. I do not believe there's an equivalency between the major empire in the history of the world and what you could call sub-imperial projects, or those countries that are empires in their formation that still have certain imperial sensibilities. I mean, I don't think China's going into Africa based solely on their humanitarian concerns. No, their particular form of Chinese imperial presence does not take the same form as the U.S. U.S. is more raw than the Chinese. And these are decisions made by elites, most of them neo-colonial elites in Africa, as how they transact between these empires. One of the things we've seen in the Ukrainian situation is what? Most of the African countries are holding back. American imperial elites are upset about that. No, these African elites are, in their own distinctive way, exercising their own sense of freedom and sovereignty as they transact with the Chinese. Now, of course, at the same time, many of those elites in Africa are also corrupt. Are they speaking to the needs of their own poor and working people? Often not at all. That's in the case of South Africa. South Africa spent so much time with Mandela and the others. And what happens? The neoliberal elites take over there. We won't go into all of that. But I'm glad to see them taking a stand against the U.S. imperial project. But it's not as if I'm going to allow them off the hook either. We have to be morally consistent. The truth sets us free, which means that the integrity and the consistency has to be pursued.
I hear you. Let's talk a little bit about how this is an area which I try to talk to my conservative brothers and sisters about when I talk to the populist right, and I explain to them when they are all talking about the border, what's going on at the border. For me, I feel like it's a red herring. We're not talking about the real issue. I love when you had that little interview with Laura Ingraham the other day. You talked about what we do when people come here and how we should treat them with dignity and pride. But what's absent from this argument, this debate, this discussion, especially when it comes to the populist right, even when it comes to the leftist liberals and the progressive, is the causality of migration. And this is an area where the first person I ever heard say our foreign policy is connected to our domestic policy is you, Dr. West. How do we get this across? Because every single time I talk to my conservative friends, I'm like, wouldn't you believe that the 82 bases in Latin America and they're not the Boy Scouts that are staying there.
That's
This
right.
is the actual cause of migration. How do we get this message across that people are coming to our southern border because of our foreign policy?
No, but see, I think you're hitting on something very, very important. And usually when I talk about this growing up in California, and when they zero in on my precious Mexican brothers and sisters, I say, the Mexican War was illegal, immoral, and a phony war. And that's Ulysses S. Grant who said that. He was a lieutenant in the war, graduate of West Point before he was president, before he led the Union Army. So that there's a sense in which the Mexican brothers and sisters are really coming home, because it was half of Mexico that was basically stolen by means of military might. So when you cast a larger backdrop, you recognize that the economies are intertwined, and the ways in which the massive exploitation of our brothers and sisters in Central America by U.S. companies makes it very, very difficult for them to survive. And then with the added challenge now of the gangsterization with the guns and the drugs and so forth, people are fleeing for their lives. So that, again, it's very important to keep in mind, not as the sole or exclusive force, but as a crucial and fundamental force of U.S. policies, politically, overthrow of democratic regimes, economically, thoroughgoing control and domination of the economy, pushing folk for another way. And they're going in a number of different directions, not just the U.S. boundary. Look, they're going in a whole lot of different places. So you have to bring that to the table, bring that kind of truth-telling to the table, and then say, how do we treat these brothers and sisters with dignity? And how do you treat them with the sanctity that they have? And then realize what happens on the U.S. side, when you get businesses who are interested in cheap labor to keep the wages down for workers who are already in the country. So it pits workers against each other, because I am for worker solidarity in the face of greedy bosses, in the face of profit maximizing elites that will do almost anything for profit and will turn their backs on satisfying the needs of their workers. And that's going to create a deep tension, because that is going to put economic pressure on workers who are already wrestling with wage stagnation. For almost 45 years, there's been wage stagnation as the profits has been expanding exponentially, and CEO salaries expanding exponentially, and the top of the professional managerial class expanding exponentially, as workers themselves trying to put food on the table, wrestling with food insecurity, wrestling with the inability to gain healthcare benefits, wrestling with wages that are stagnating, and so on. That larger story needs to be told. Well, I'm probably going on too long, but that's the framework that I bring to this, my brother.
Well, I think next time we get you on, or if I see you on the campaign trail, because I think everybody who knows me says I'll get out there with a microphone and camera and just show up like I did with RFK just recently. You can expect to see me out there. I just want to kind of note, what's that?
I said, that'd be beautiful. I'd welcome you right on in, though, brother.
You know I will. So we got this book over here, Democracy Matters. Okay. But does democracy matter if we do not have a fair and transparent election system? So my question to you right off the bat is, and this is my area of expertise, I'm an election integrity expert. I've gone over to other countries in Latin America and seen fair, transparent elections. In your mind, was the 2020 election fair?
See, I don't think that any election in the United States meets the highest levels of fairness, giving the role of big money that selects candidates already before people even go to the voters' booth. And when they go to the voters' booth, they're choosing between two parties that themselves are already captive to corporate wealth. Now, is it fair in the very, very narrow sense of a majority of the votes or most of the votes being counted and then reported as they're counted? Now there, I think one can make a strong case. This is where I would have deep disagreements with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is thoroughly convinced that the very votes that were put forward were not counted at all. Now, when he talks about the election being rigged in the structural and institutional sense, well, that's a different issue, because we can
Where
talk
do you
about
stand
how
on that?
oh no, there's no doubt that the very fact that we could have two parties for so long that are tied to the same Wall Street Pentagon interests means there is a quality of it being rigged. When I supported Brother Bernie Sanders in 2016, 2020, the Democratic Party rigged it against him. There was no way he could win. And when we were winning, as you might recall in Nevada, and Brother Obama makes the phone call to have all the neoliberal politicians drop out, Pete and Amy and company. Why? Because they said nobody, or put it this way, Bernie will never win. There's no way he will win. Well, that's what you call rigged. But that's a structural and an institutional rigging that's very different than votes that are put forward and votes that are counted.
Okay,
and that's why
let me stop you really quick, Dr. West, because
very much so.
I listen, I agree with that part. There's the political part, the way we can use the media, we can sway the media. We saw with the WikiLeaks drops. But what I'm asking you, Dr. West, because this is an area where it's going to come back to haunt you if you don't get ahead of this, when it comes to the election process itself. Do we have a fair process itself? Because let me explain to you, in Nicaragua, you have 1 day of voting. It's on a Sunday. You must show up at your designated election spot, your precinct, with ID. It takes about 10 minutes to vote. Where the vote is cast, it is counted. There's no proprietary software there. So what I'm trying to say, ask you too, is what
Brazil's
we
the
talk
same
about
way.
Fannie Lou.
Brazil's the
she was
same
an
way.
election activist.
Neo-fascist leader. Brazil's the same way. It's counted. Digitally.
I was in Brazil, so I know about it. But this election system we have here today, because you're a Green Party member now, right? So you're running as a Green. You don't have to worry about this whole. Okay, is the process of the election fair?
I don't think it is fair in the structural and institutional sense of what an election really should be. No, I don't.
Good. What area would you tackle first?
Well, first, I would make sure on a very minimal level that, that the citizenry has time to vote, national holiday. Each vote goes in immediately without having to be mediated with a whole host of other entities and persons. But then I would have, my critique of campaign financing, and to make sure that persons' votes that go in are not confined to just two politicians of two parties, both parties being tied to corporate interests and the Pentagon. So you got a structural institutional level, then you've got a procedural level, and then you've got to make it available to citizens and do all you can to encourage citizens, to empower citizens to vote. What is it? New Zealand, 90-some% of their citizens vote. The United States, what is it? 60-some% on a good day.
Yeah.
Why?
On a good day,
35, 40% of our fellow citizens don't participate whatsoever. I'm going to them too, my brother. Not
on
just
a good
Trump country. I'm going to them too, along with my progressive folk, and especially, as you know, my black folk and brown folk.
Well, do you think we should have mass mail-out ballots?
I think we can learn something from those countries that are able to count their ballots within hours because of the mediated with the computers that actually work and computers that allow for transparency. Yes.
Yeah. See, here's my recommendation. We have to eliminate mass mail-out ballots. If you want to get a mail-out ballot, if you are handicapped, you can't go. If you're a military person, you can't go. So be it. But every election, you should have to re-register for that mail-in ballot. It should be vote, like you said, voter holiday. All these countries I went to, it's a Sunday.
All of them. All because they're interested in their citizen participating.
Yeah. And they all must have ID when they go to their designated voting precinct. This whole vote center makes it impossible to audit an election. But it's also very rapid. You get in and you get out. You don't have to wait for hours in lines. It's almost like they broke the system so they can purposely move people in the mail-in ballots, because with mail-in ballots, you don't need to necessarily generate a voter. You just have to generate a ballot. And with ballot harvesting now, right, when a person can drop off thousands of ballots and then drop boxes, you don't know where these ballots are coming from. There's zero chain of custody. Not to mention the way that Brother Bernie got cheated in the first time in 2016. It was cheated on the back end. We have proprietary software counting these ballots, meaning we, the people who fund this election, can't even open up the hood and look at the car and the engine and what's going on. So that's why we need to get back to in-precinct accounting, hand counted in front of the people. You can use a machine that has open source in front of them with results that night. Dr. West, if we don't tackle this, you or any grassroots candidate has no chance.
No, you're absolutely right. But I do believe this, though, brother, that I don't think poor and working people will ever be able to live the lives they deserve based exclusively on the ballot. I think you have to have social movements. I think you have to have ways in which the workplace is reorganized, the way in which media is reorganized, the way in which culture is reorganized. It's not going to be a matter of folk being able to live the kind of lives with dignity they deserve based solely on the ballot. The ballot is just one particular moment within a larger effort of a people's movement, a poor and working people's movement, to try to reshape the society in a way that it results in fundamental transformation, protecting rights and liberties across the board, but also trying to engage in a massive redistribution of wealth downward. Because I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to homelessness. I've said on many occasions, even if I win, my dear brother Pastor, I don't even plan to go to the White House until everybody has a house. That's just the kind of spirit of it.
I love
it's
the
Martin Luther King Jr. legacy. And that's what it means to bear witness vis-a-vis citizen to citizen. I'll always be a citizen, even as president. I am a citizen. I'm not a king. I'm not a monarch. I'm not a Pied Piper. I am a citizen who has chosen to play this role for the empowerment of my fellow citizens, and beginning with the least of these, of course. Just as a Christian, I always begin with the poor and the orphans and the widows. I learned this from my Hebrew scripture. My precious Jewish brothers and sisters, unleash that into the world. Let us institutionalize a commitment to orphans and widows and so forth. That's one reason why the Palestinians are still so very important. Because you got the Jewish peoples who unleashed into the world this magnificent conception of the world where the oppressor at the center, and then you end up with an Israeli state that oppresses Palestinians. We have to be consistent across the board, morally as well as spiritually.
I agree 100%. And unfortunately for us, Dr. West, the voters here in America, when it comes to foreign policy, it's an issue that's way down low. When it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's really, really low. And I think that you are the best when it comes to Israel and Palestine. The way you explain it is amazing, because you include the protection of the Jewish state, of the Jewish peoples, as well as the integrity.
That doesn't mean it's the Jewish security is not identical with the Israeli state. For most Jewish brothers and sisters, they understand it that way. But the Israeli state has not been able to provide Jewish security. You can see the various attacks going on all the time. I want Jewish security. I want Palestinian dignity simultaneously.
Agreed. You're the best on it. But let's get to the area where it's most concerning, because when you look at the voters in America, the COVID, the vaccine, and the protocols, they're up here, and Israeli-Palestine is down there. Right now, RFK is taking a licking right now for his comments that I went and I caught him up on camera, and I asked him that question, and it started a sandstorm out there. But people have also been talking about your positions on COVID. I got a video over here I want to play, because I got to be honest with you, Dr. West. This video, it hurt me. It really did. I did not like your position on it right now. So let's play it, and then you can clarify. Because I would say, and I don't know if you agree, the greatest sin when it came to the COVID-19 situation was censorship. They shut people out. And I know you're for free speech across the board.
Absolutely.
They didn't let doctors.
Like censorship, my brother.
Yeah, they didn't let doctors be doctors. Like Dr. McCullough, one of the most revered, peer-reviewed virologists on the planet, was demonetized, was taken down. was shut up. Dr. Zelenko, who had actually worked with hydroxychloroquine and other alternatives, was shut down. Let's play this video over here right now because we need an explanation. We got to get out in front of this if we are going to handle this, because if you do want to talk to those conservative people, this is an issue high on their charts. Take a listen.
Yes.
Go ahead, Cornel.
It just strikes me that part of the problem, and what a blessing to just be in conversation with you, though, brother. What a great exemplar of integrity, honesty, decency you have been over your 79 years on the globe. But it just seems to me there's a spiritual decay in the country in terms of people just not caring about each other, people not being concerned enough about each other. How does one deal with that as a scientist? And it just strikes me as you have been very distinctive as a scientist because you're so deeply grounded in humanity and humanitarian sensibility, grounded in a Jesuit education, grounded in all that love coming out of the Italian-American communities going back to the old country. How do you deal with that spiritual decay? Because you can say what you said on TV over and over again, but if our fellow citizens don't care enough for each other, what then do you do, my brother?
Yeah, well, Dr. West, you bring up a very good point.
Okay, so this one is upsetting because number one, I don't know how we got to the conclusion that Dr. Fauci is any type of kind person. He has had a bad history when it came to the AIDS pandemic, right? What that did to our gay community, how it made them suffer. They made a movie about it, the Dallas Buyers Club. I mean, he almost did the same thing with the AIDS pandemic he did with COVID, where he didn't allow other alternatives, other medicines to get out there. But the thing that really upset me more than anything, Dr. West, and I know you know this because you talk about COINTELPRO, you understand the intelligence community. If I can create a situation in what you do to your body affects me, I have the ultimate divisive weapon out there possible. That statement you made was very, very divisive because it wasn't that we didn't love each other. It's that we weren't able to have a conversation about it. And I can go on about masks, how bad they are. But do you regret these comments? And do you regret kind of uplifting Dr. Fauci in this situation? Because people have said to me, they're like, you should ask Dr. West. It seems like there's more than one crack pipe going around when he could say these things about Dr. Fauci when he's had a history tied to the pharmaceutical companies, tied to gain of function, tied to Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation. The financial gains of this towards the millionaire class, the billionaire class that came to the COVID-19 is off the charts. So do you want to make a comment about this and try to give us a little insight to what you were thinking and why you said these things?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you raising this question, though, brother, because, what I said was not based on any extensive investigation. I always know that the pharmaceutical companies have a disproportionate role in shaping the public policy. That's what corporate power and what corporate wealth does, be it in one sphere as opposed to another. But I was basing it in part on what I was perceiving in what Brother Fauci was putting forward, given that knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry having that kind of influence. And it was in real time that we were in such crisis. We had to do something, and we needed to have someone who was trying to put forward a view or a set of policies that could push back the disease on the one hand and also try to envision an overcoming of it down the road on the other. I agree with you. I do not believe in censorship. I do not believe in suppressing dissenting voices. That includes dissenting doctors, that includes dissenting schools of medicine and what have you. In that particular moment, I probably should have been much, much, much more critical. So I would acknowledge that. There's no doubt about it. But let me ask you a question. Do you believe that Brother Fauci has any commitment to the well-being? I've always felt he had some commitment to the well-being of fellow citizens.
You see this book right here? I knew everything in this book before it came out, right? This is an area where people are going to say, this is RFK's book about Dr. Fauci, because this is an area where he was a champion, he led about. It didn't take much research to understand where Dr. Fauci had been and the sins that he has created. There's a whole graveyard full of children in New York that leads to Dr. Fauci's funding in his hands. There's beagles, dogs we can talk about. I do not believe that Dr. Fauci cares about people one bit. He only cares about his pocket. And we have all the evidence and the receipts. 80% of Republicans want him tried for what he did. Only 33% of Democrats do, and that's still high. But 60% of independents think he should be tried for his crimes against humanity. And Dr. West, I'm sorry. I don't accept this right here, because if I could figure out what's going on, and I got crucified as a leftist, as an old school progressive, I got crucified because I can't understand. Maybe you can explain this to me. The number one issue when it came to Bernie Sanders was what? Medicare for all. Our number one enemy was the pharmaceutical lobbyist and big pharma. How for 1 second could we think that all of a sudden that they're going to be benevolent?
No,
I
I never made a claim they were
benevolent.
I never made a claim they were benevolent. I said they're always already bringing power and pressure to bear. I just thought that Brother Fauci had much more of an humanitarian element than you're giving him credit for. If you're calling him a criminal committing crimes against humanity, that would be something that I would have to be more thoroughly persuaded. I mean, I hear about the book. I've taken a look at the book, but the book can be wrong, brother. The book can be wrong too.
You know me, I'm across the board. I'm an equal opportunity.
But I appreciate the challenge, and I appreciate you pushing me. Yeah. And there are times in which I've got to get off the crack pipe too. I acknowledge that now. I'm glad you are. That's the case as of yet. But there are times in which I do. No doubt about that, my brother.
I said this before. Somebody said this the other day. Like, we had Keith McHenry on the morning show. We need to take RFK to the West Bank and let him see for his eyes. Well, the same thing over here, Dr. West. I think we just got to get up on this. And I'm not saying this to crucify you or go after you or to harm you. I'm going this because I think you need to get out in front of this right now, because this is going to be a big area. There's a whole medical freedom movement. So let's see where you stand on these things today. We'll get you out of here shortly. I know you got a tight schedule. Do you believe, Dr. West, that the COVID-19 was a natural virus, a lab leak, or a bioweapon?
Actually, I'm quite open to all three. I think that we've got evidence that's underdetermined, which means that it's subject to multiple interpretations. And I don't want to be dogmatic on one or the other, but I think that it's much more complicated than what was put forward in the past or even in the present. We'll find out retrospectively, but I'm open to a variety of different views on this issue, my brother.
What do you know about the WHO and the WEF and Klaus Schwab in particular?
I don't want to put forward any kind of judgment until I've had a chance to explore much more exhaustively the evidence and the text, my brother. I just know that as international organizations, they are disproportionately shaped by American corporate interests and American imperial interests.
Do you know anything about the WHO treaty? Have you heard of that?
Oh, yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
I would say it again. From what I know of that treaty, the major motifs are excessive American corporate imperial influence.
Would you still say the vaccine is safe and effective, or would you recommend against it?
The vaccine as practiced right now.
What we know today. What we know today,
based on, let's say, the 3 that I got to refuse to take the force from me and my wife in that regard. You see, I think from what I can see that the success was overbloated and excessive. Now, did it save some lives? I'm sure it had to save some lives. I don't know, but I'm sure it had to save some lives. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to be dogmatic on this thing, not at all. But at the same time, I'm going to be, humble enough to acknowledge my own kind of relative ignorance and my openness to trying to pursue much broader knowledge about it.
Okay, because the things we still know about the vaccine is that, number one, it takes years to create a vaccine. This came out in less than a year. This vaccine is still under emergency use authorization. We know that COVID vaccine patents have been around for a long time, thanks to Dr. David Martin. We also know this is mRNA technology. It is still an experiment. We don't know about this, so I'm
Still in
glad that
process.
you
Still in process.
yeah, still in process. So you said you're definitely against mandates, right?
I don't like mandates. I don't like that kind of imposition of people's ability to make choices. Absolutely, you're right.
Are you aware about the Green Party's Black Caucus that came out against the steering committee? Because now that you're in the Green Party, if we can bring that up real quick, Cheese Slice, the Black Caucus was vehemently opposed to what the steering committee had done when they had came out for mandates, and it created a circular firing squad within the Green Party. Are you aware about the Black Caucus?
Yeah, no, I don't know about that with my precious green brothers and sisters. Though I haven't stayed up on all of the internal struggles going on. I will find out quickly because I'm in the nominating party process.
Hey, Dr. West, is everything going to, there's been a lot of talk recently. Somebody made a video too as well. Is everything going to be fixed behind the scenes as far as your, as far as you running as a Green Party member, as far as your filing? Do you have a campaign manager yet? Do you have a campaign treasurer yet? Because a lot of people are still bringing up that you're still under the People's Party and haven't moved over to the Green Party yet. Is all that going to be straightened out? Because there's a lot of...
No, I'm already moved over to the Green Party. I have a great appreciation of the People's Party being kind enough to ask me to be a presidential candidate. But given the challenges of the People's Party, given the challenges of the People's Party leadership, even given my gratitude for their volunteers, that I made the shift to the Green Party. I met with my dear brother Juma Baraka and sister Jill Stein, that we're in the process of setting in place an infrastructure and an institution, and we are on the move, brother. We already got 20 states. We're trying to get 41 states in just a few months. And so we're trying to really focus, as you can imagine, on the suffering of working people and poor people and their resistance and their resilience. And we hope not to be distracted from what has happened in the past. And most importantly, I'm calling for a broad united front, a broad coalition that embraces a variety of voices, not dogmatic voices, not one linear voices, a variety of different voices with all of the tensions that includes. But if you believe that the corporate duopoly needs to go, if you're committed to the plight of working people and the enhancement of poor people and the critiques of corporate America and anti-empire, we say, please be a part of the United Front. That includes every party, that includes every institution. And it means then it's going to be an ideological realignment, my brother. You're going to get some folk coming together who are not used to being together. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, well, I'm all for that. And that's really the highlight of my work. I love going and talking to people who think differently than me. And being an election integrity activist, unfortunately, the progressives did not get aboard the whole election integrity thing, but the Trumpers did in 2020 because they thought they were robbed. And I'm able to go into their house and speak with them and then talk to them about foreign policy being a cause of migration and how we fix these things. I think it's great.
But I mean, part of the key here, though, is that, you have someone like myself, and I'm a cracked vessel like everybody else, but I have a tremendous animus, moral and spiritual animus against any forms of white supremacy and male supremacy and homophobia and transphobia, any ideology that loses sight of the humanity of Arabs or Jews or Muslims or Palestinians or any group, anti-xenophobia across the board.
Yeah.
And that becomes very, very important here, even as we attempt to fight together and struggle together.
Yeah. Dr. West, you got a question from Laura Ingram the other day, and it kind of paused on it. Let's talk about the transphobia situation.
But brother, I got a 2 o'clock thing I'm already late for.
Oh, you got to go?
But you can finish up with this.
Well,
last point.
I was just going to ask you, when I talk to a lot of conservatives and I talk to a lot of people on the populist right, they don't
Yes.
say they're transphobic. The area that they are most concerned is that sexuality and gender is taught in schools. I mean, is it really, when you're going to approach a person who's a conservative or a populist right, they're going to say that. How are you going to handle that? Because I never thought that we should ever have sexuality taught in schools. So when it comes to transphobia, do they not have a point, at least a conversation to listen to when they're saying we just don't want our precious children being indoctrinated and programmed?
I mean, the thing is, you never, ever want any parent or any person to be indoctrinated and programmed by a teacher. I don't care if it's American history. I don't care if it's about sexuality. A teacher is not there to indoctrinate. That I think that, in fact, it's very important that people begin with a notion of acknowledging there's a variety of different peoples in the world, and they all should be respected with dignity. But that's almost about all you need to say. I don't think you need a whole lot more, because once you get into that, then all of a sudden you start taking positions on a whole host of issues that the teacher has very little expertise on, and could easily misconstrue material or mislead students. So that in that sense, I'm not big on teaching sexuality. I'm big on teaching dignity of a variety of different persons, and there have always been, and there will always be, a lot of different persons of different sexuality, different sexual fluidity. But that doesn't need to be the fundamental subject matter in a classroom. And there I do resonate with some of the conservative fellow citizens, but we'd have to have a much longer discussion on that too. You can imagine.
Come back when Fiorella gets back, because she'd love to talk to you, and I'd love you guys to talk about what she experienced with Alex Saab and all that. Dr. West, thank you so much for coming on. If I don't catch up to you soon, I'll see you on the campaign trail.
Absolutely. God bless you and your family, man. You stay strong now, Brother Pastor.
I will, Dr. Cornel West. Thank you for coming on. I'll speak to you soon.
Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you, man.
There you go. Okay, so let's see real quick. He had to run to another interview. I see no tips over on the Rockfin. I hope I got to answer some of those questions and talk about some of the issues over there that y'all wanted me to hear. It was an interesting conversation. We can have a conversation for a lot longer with Dr. Cornel West. But anyways, that's it for today, guys. Fiorella will be back soon. She just got back from Venezuela. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for everybody who made this possible. Remember, if you want to help out the Convo Couch in any way, all the links are down below. We have a Patreon. We have a Rockfin, which you can subscribe to, and that helps out the channel. That is our free speech platform. So for Jamie Cheese Slice on the ones and twos and Fiorella, who just got back, I am Pasta Jardula. That was Dr. Cornel West. Convo out, everybody. We'll see you soon.